On a cold winter evening in the English countryside, Emma walked slowly around her small cattle ranch. The wind was strong and made a loud noise as it blew through the trees. Snow was falling heavily on the fields, making everything look white and peaceful. But Emma did not feel peaceful inside her heart. Her husband had died 2 years ago, and since then, Emma had to take care of the ranch all by herself. It was very hard work every morning. She had to feed the cows and check if they were healthy. She had to fix broken fences and make sure the animals had enough water to drink. Sometimes she felt so tired that she wanted to cry. Emma was only 35 years old, but she felt much older. Her hands were rough from all the hard work, and her back hurt from carrying heavy things. She missed her husband very much. He used to help her with everything, and they would laugh together while working. Now the ranch was very quiet, and Emma often felt lonely. The snow was getting heavier, and Emma decided to go inside her house. She made herself a cup of hot tea and sat by the kitchen window. She liked to watch the snow fall because it reminded her of when she was a child. Her mother used to say that snow was like tiny angels coming down from heaven. As Emma sipped her tea, she saw something moving near her gate. At first, she thought it might be one of her cows that had escaped. But when she looked more carefully, she saw it was a person. Someone was walking very slowly in the heavy snow, and they looked like they might fall down. Emma put on her warm coat and boots quickly. She grabbed a flashlight and ran outside into the cold night. The snow was so thick that she could barely see anything. She called out, "Hello, are you okay?" There was no answer, but Emma kept walking toward the gate. When she got closer, she saw a young woman lying in the snow. The woman was not moving, and Emma was very worried. She knelt down next to her and saw that the woman was still breathing, but she looked very cold and weak. The woman was holding a torn cloth bag very tightly against her chest. Even though she was unconscious, her arms were wrapped round her bag like it was the most important thing in the world. Emma tried to take the bag away to help the woman, but her grip was too strong. Emma knew she had to get the woman inside quickly before she froze in the snow. She was not very big, but Emma was strong from all her ranch work. She carefully lifted the woman and carried her toward the house. The snow was making it hard to walk, but Emma did not give up. When they got inside, Emma laid the woman on the sofa near the fireplace. She quickly started a fire to make the room warm. The woman's clothes were wet from the snow, and her face was very pale. Emma brought warm blankets and covered her carefully. The woman's hands were covered in thick, dirty gloves that looked very old. They seemed like they had never been taken off, even to wash them. Emma thought this was strange, but she did not want to remove them without permission. After about an hour, the woman slowly opened her eyes. She looked round the room with confusion and fear when she saw Emma sitting nearby. She tried to sit up quickly. "It's okay," Emma said in a gentle voice. "You're safe now. You were lying in the snow outside my ranch." The woman looked down at her hands and then at the cloth bag she was still holding. Her first words were very quiet but sounded desperate. "Please, take them off." Emma was confused. She thought the woman might be talking about her wet clothes or maybe her boots. "Take what off?" Emma asked kindly, but the woman just closed her eyes and did not answer. Emma thought she might be confused because she was so cold. Sometimes when people get very cold, they say things that do not make sense. Emma went to the kitchen and made hot tea with honey. She brought it to the woman and helped her drink it slowly. The warm tea seemed to make her feel a little better. "What's your name?" Emma asked gently. "Grace." The woman whispered, still holding the bag tightly. "I've been walking for days. I have nowhere else to go." Emma's heart filled with compassion. She could see that Grace was very sad and scared. Emma remembered how she felt when her husband died and she had nobody to help her. She knew what it was like to feel alone in the world. "You can stay here tonight," Emma said. "Don't worry about anything. We'll figure everything out tomorrow when you feel better." Grace looked at Emma with surprise. She had not expected a stranger to be so kind to her. Tears started to fall down her face, but she tried to hide them. Emma brought more blankets and a pillow. She helped Grace lie down by the fireplace where it was warm and comfortable. As Grace fell asleep, Emma noticed that she was still crying, quietly. Whatever Grace was carrying in that torn cloth bag seemed to be very heavy, not just in weight, but in her heart. Emma stayed awake for a while, watching the fire and thinking about the strange woman who had appeared in the snow. She wondered what had happened to Grace and why she seemed so afraid and sad. The next morning, Emma woke up early as she always did. The sun was just starting to come up, and the snow had stopped falling during the night. Everything outside looked clean and white. Emma quietly walked to the kitchen so she would not wake up Grace, who was still sleeping by the fireplace. Emma started making breakfast. She was used to cooking for just herself, but today she felt happy to have someone else in the house. It had been a long time since she had cooked for another person. She made eggs, toast, and fresh coffee. The smell of food filled the warm kitchen. Grace woke up when she heard the sounds from the kitchen. She sat up slowly and looked around. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the kind woman who had saved her from the snow. Grace felt embarrassed that she had been such trouble for a stranger. "Good morning," Emma said with a smile when she saw Grace was awake. "How do you feel today?" "Much better, thank you," Grace replied quietly. She still held her cloth bag close to her chest. "I should help you with breakfast. You have been so kind to me." Grace tried to stand up and walk to the kitchen. Emma watched as Grace moved very carefully. She noticed that Grace held her gloved hands in a strange way, like they were hurt or broken. When Grace tried to help set the table, Emma saw that even simple things were very hard for her. Grace tried to open a jar of jam, but she could not grip it properly. Her gloved hands seemed clumsy and weak. She tried to pick up a cup, but she had to use both hands and move very slowly. Even holding a piece of toast was difficult for her. Emma watched with growing concern. She could see that Grace was trying very hard to appear normal, but something was clearly wrong with her hands. Grace looked frustrated and sad when she could not do simple tasks that should have been easy. "Grace," Emma said with kindness in her voice, "what happened to you? I can see that you are having trouble with your hands." Grace stopped trying to help and sat down at the kitchen table, her eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at her lap. For a long moment, she did not say anything. Emma waited patiently, not wanting to push her to talk if she was not ready. Finally, Grace took a deep breath and looked up at Emma. "I need to show you something," she said in a shaky voice. "But it might frighten you." Grace slowly opened her torn cloth bag. Emma watched as Grace carefully pulled out her objects wrapped in soft cloth. When Grace unwrapped them, Emma saw two artificial hands. They looked real, but were made of plastic and metal. They were prosthetics, but they looked like they had never been used. "There was a fire at the art school where I taught," Grace said quietly. Her voice was full of pain and sadness. "It happened 6 months ago. The building was old, and the fire spread very quickly. There were 20 children in my art class that day." Grace paused and wiped tears from her eyes. Emma sat down next to her and listened carefully. She could see that this was very hard for Grace to talk about. "The children were trapped on the second floor," Grace continued. "The stairs were blocked by fire and smoke. I could hear them crying and calling for help. The firefighters had not arrived yet, and I knew I had to do something. Grace's hands were shaking as she spoke. I found a ladder outside and climbed up to the window. One by one, I helped the children climb down to safety. The fire was getting bigger and hotter. But I could not leave them there. Emma felt her heart beating fast as she listened to Grace's story. She could imagine how scary and dangerous it must have been. I was helping the last little girl when part of the roof fell down, Grace said, her voice becoming very quiet. Burning wood and metal crashed down on my hands. I managed to push the girl to safety, but my hands were trapped under the heavy, burning pieces. Grace stopped talking and looked down at her gloved hands. Emma waited quietly, understanding that Grace needed time to continue her story. When the firefighters finally got me out, my hands were badly burned, Grace said. The doctors tried to save them, but the damage was too severe. They had to remove both of my hands at the wrists. With trembling movements, Grace slowly pulled off one of her thick gloves. Emma gasped softly when she saw Grace's arm. Where her hand should have been, there was only scarred skin at her wrist. The scars looked painful and showed how much Grace had suffered. I lost both hands, Grace continued, her voice breaking with emotion. All the children survived without any serious injuries, but I lost the most important parts of my body. I was an artist, Emma. I painted beautiful pictures. I taught children how to create wonderful things with their hands. Painting was my whole life. Grace looked at the artificial hands sitting on the table. The doctors gave me these prosthetics 3 months ago. They said I could learn to use them and do many normal things again. But I have been too scared to even try them. What if they do not work? What if I can never create art again? Emma reached out and gently touched Grace's shoulder. She could feel how much pain Grace was carrying in her heart. Grace, Emma said, softly, you saved those children. That makes you a hero, not someone who has lost everything. But I cannot paint anymore, Grace cried. I cannot even hold a paintbrush. Art was who I was. Without my hands, I feel like I am nothing. I feel like I died in that fire too. Emma understood Grace's fear very well. When her husband died, she had been afraid to try running the ranch by herself. She had almost given up and sold everything because she was so scared of failing. Maybe we can face our fears together, Emma said softly. Over the following weeks, Emma and Grace slowly became good friends. Every morning, they would have breakfast together and talk about their plans for the day. Grace was still very sad about losing her hands, but being around Emma made her feel less alone. Emma had always done all the ranch work by herself since her husband died. Now she had someone to talk to while she worked, and it made the hard jobs feel easier. Grace wanted to help, but she was worried that she would not be able to do anything useful without proper hands. I want to help you, Grace said one morning, but I do not know how I can do ranch work with these. She looked down at her arms where her gloves covered the places where her hands used to be. Emma thought about this problem. She was a practical woman who had learned to solve many difficulties on her own. Let me show you some different ways to do things, Emma said. Maybe we can find methods that work for you. The first job Emma showed Grace was feeding the chickens. Normally, people would scoop the chicken feed with their hands and throw it on the ground. But Emma taught Grace how to use a small bucket instead. Grace could hold the bucket between her arms and tip it to pour out the feed. The chickens did not care how the food got there. They were just happy to eat. Grace felt proud. When she successfully fed all the chickens by herself, it was the first useful thing she had done since the fire. I did it, She said with excitement, "I actually helped with something important." Next, Emma showed Grace how to help with the cows. Grace could not milk them or fix fences, but she could watch the animals and make sure they were all healthy. She learned to count the cows and check that none of them were missing. She could also fill their water containers using special techniques Emma taught her. Grace discovered that she could push wheelbarrows by using her arms and shoulders. She could carry hay by holding the bundles against her chest. She could even open and close gates by using her whole body to push and pull them every day. Grace found new ways to be helpful around the ranch. She felt good about herself for the first time since the accident. Emma was patient and encouraging, always helping Grace find solutions instead of focusing on problems. In the evenings, Emma and Grace would sit by the fireplace and talk. Grace told Emma stories about her life as an art teacher, and Emma shared memories of her husband and their dreams for the ranch. They both felt less lonely having each other for company. 3 weeks after Grace arrived, Emma noticed that Grace kept looking at her cloth bag. The artificial hands were still inside, and used and untouched. Grace seemed to think about them often, but she never mentioned them. "I have been thinking," Emma said one evening as they sat drinking tea. "What if you tried the artificial hands? I could help you learn how to use them." Grace became very quiet. She had been avoiding this moment for months. Even before she came to Emma's ranch, the prosthetic hands represented both hope and fear. Hope that she might be able to do normal things again, but fear that they would not work properly and she would feel even more broken. "I do not know if I can do this," Grace whispered. Her voice was full of worry and doubt. "What if I try them and they do not work? What if I still cannot do the things I want to do?" Emma understood Grace's fear very well. After her husband died, she had been terrified to try running the ranch alone. She had worried that she would fail and lose everything they had built together. But she had learned that sometimes the only way to overcome fear is to face it directly, one step at a time. Emma encouraged her gently. "Just like I had to learn to run this ranch alone after my husband died. I was scared too, but I had to try." Grace looked at Emma's kind face and felt courage growing in her heart. Emma had shown her so much patience and friendship. Maybe it was time to be brave. With shaking arms, Grace pulled out the prosthetic hands from her cloth bag. They were more complicated than regular gloves. They had straps and buckles that needed to be attached to her arms. Emma had read the instruction booklet that came with them, so she knew how to help. It took several tries to get the first prosthetic hand attached properly. Grace had to be very still while Emma carefully fastened all the straps. The artificial hand felt strange and heavy on Grace's arm. It was different from having a real hand, but it was better than having nothing. The second prosthetic was easier to attach because they had learned from the first one. When both artificial hands were securely fastened, Grace sat very still and looked at them. They looked almost like real hands, but they felt completely different. "Try to move the fingers," Emma suggested softly. Grace concentrated very hard and slowly managed to make the prosthetic fingers close into a fist. Then she opened them again. It was difficult and required a lot of effort, but it worked. Emma picked up Grace's cup of tea and held it up to her. "Try to take this," she said. Grace reached out very carefully with both prosthetic hands. It took several attempts, but finally she managed to grip the cup securely, for the first time in months. Grace was holding something with both hands. Tears of joy streamed down Grace's face. "I thought I would never feel whole again," she cried. "You are always whole," Emma said with a warm smile. "You just needed to believe it." That night, after Emma went to bed, Grace walked round the house looking at everything with new eyes. She found an old paintbrush in a drawer in Emma's kitchen, with her new prosthetic hands. She picked it up very carefully. The grip was different from what she remembered, but it was possible. The brush felt real in her artificial fingers. Maybe, just maybe, she could create beautiful things again. When spring arrived at the ranch, everything began to change. The snow melted away, and green grass started growing in the fields. The trees grew new leaves, and flowers bloomed everywhere. Grace felt like she was growing and changing too, just like the world round her. Grace had been practicing with her prosthetic hands every single day since she first put them on. At first, even simple things like picking up a spoon were very difficult. But Emma encouraged her to keep trying, and slowly Grace got better at using her artificial hands after a few weeks of practice. Grace felt brave enough to try something she had not done since the fire. She asked Emma if she could borrow some paint and paper. Emma was happy to buy art supplies for Grace. Even though money was tight on the ranch, Grace started by painting very simple pictures. Her first painting was just blue sky and green grass. It was not perfect, but it was beautiful, because it meant Grace was creating art again. She painted the cows standing in the field. She painted Emma's house with smoke coming from the chimney. She painted the sunrise over the hills, with golden light spreading across the land. Each painting was better than the last one. Grace's prosthetic hands were getting stronger and more skilled. She learned how to hold brushes in new ways and how to control the paint on the canvas. Most importantly, she was happy again when she painted. Word about Grace began to spread through the nearby village. People talked about the brave woman who had saved children from a fire and then lost her hands. They talked about how she was living at Emma's ranch and learning to paint again with artificial hands. Yes. Some people were curious, and others were inspired by her story. One day, a woman named Mrs. Johnson came to visit the ranch. She had a 7-year-old daughter named Lucy who loved to draw and paint. Mrs. Johnson had heard about Grace and wanted to meet her. "My daughter loves art," Mrs. Johnson explained to Emma and Grace. "She draws pictures every day. When I told her about you, she said she wanted to meet the lady who teaches painting with special hands." Grace felt nervous about meeting the little girl. She had not talked to children since the fire happened. She was worried that they might be scared of her prosthetic hands or ask difficult questions about the accident. But when Lucy met Grace, she was not scared at all. She looked at Grace's artificial hands with interest and asked, "Do those help you paint better?" Grace smiled at the innocent question. "They help me paint again," she answered. "I had to learn new ways to hold my brushes. Can you teach me?" Lucy asked with excitement. More parents heard about Grace and started bringing their children to the ranch. They asked if Grace would be willing to teach art classes for their kids. Grace felt scared about this idea. "I do not know if I am ready," Grace told Emma nervously. "What if I cannot teach them properly? What if they ask questions I cannot answer?" Emma looked at her friend with confidence and love. "You saved children before," Emma replied. "Now you can inspire them to create beautiful things." Emma helped. Grace set up a small art studio in the old barn on the ranch. They cleaned out a corner and put up tables and chairs. Emma bought more art supplies with money she had been saving. Grace organized everything carefully, just like she used to do in her old classroom. The first art class had only 5 children. Grace was very nervous. But the children were excited and happy to be there. Grace taught them that everyone can create art, no matter what challenges they might face. She showed them that there are many different ways to make beautiful pictures. Grace demonstrated how to paint with regular brushes, but she also showed them other techniques. She taught them how to paint with sponges, which made interesting textures. She showed them how to use their fingers to blend colors together. She even taught them how to paint with cotton swabs and pieces of cardboard. One little boy named Tom came to the art class with his mother. Tom had been born with a condition that made his hands shake and made it hard for him to hold things steadily. His mother was worried that he would not be able to keep up with the other children. But Grace understood Tom's challenge immediately. She sat next to him and showed him special techniques that worked better for his hands. Instead of trying to hold a small brush, Grace taught Tom how to paint with big sponges and his fingers. She showed him how to make beautiful patterns by pressing his whole hand into the paint and then onto the paper. When Tom created his first painting using these new methods, his face lit up with pure joy. The painting was full of bright colors and interesting shapes. It was different from what the other children made, but it was wonderful and unique. "You are amazing, Miss Grace," Tom said with a huge smile. "You make everyone feel special." Other children in the class agreed. Grace had a gift for helping each child find their own way to create art. She never made anyone feel bad if their painting looked different. Instead, she celebrated each child's unique style and creativity. Emma often watched the art classes from the doorway of the barn. Her heart was full of pride as she saw Grace teaching and laughing with the children. The ranch that had been so quiet and lonely was now filled with the sounds of happy children learning and creating. Grace had found her purpose again. She was still a teacher, just in a different place and with different hands. The old cloth bag that had once held her fears and unused prosthetics now carried paint brushes, tubes of paint, and most importantly, hope for the future. 1 year had passed since Grace first collapsed in the snow outside Emma's ranch. The seasons had changed from winter to spring, then summer, autumn, and winter again. But the biggest changes had happened in the hearts of Grace and Emma, and in the lives of all the children who came to learn art at the ranch. The village had grown to love Grace and her inspiring story. Everyone knew about the brave woman who had saved children from a fire and then learned to paint again with artificial hands. The children she taught told their parents amazing stories about their art classes, and soon Grace became famous throughout the whole region. The village council decided to organize a special art show to celebrate Grace's work and to show all the beautiful paintings that she and her students had created. They chose the community center as the location because it was the biggest building in the village and could hold many people. 4 weeks before the art show, Grace and Emma worked together to prepare. They carefully selected the best paintings from Grace's collection and from each of her students. Grace had painted dozens of pictures during the year, landscapes of the ranch, portraits of the animals, and scenes of children learning and playing. But Grace's most special painting was also her largest one. It showed Emma working on the ranch on a sunny morning. Emma was feeding the cows, and the golden sunlight made everything look warm and peaceful. Grace had painted Emma's face with great care, showing the kindness and strength that had saved Grace's life. She gave the painting a title, "A Woman Who Taught Me to Live Again." On the night of the art show, the community center was filled with people from the village and from towns many miles away. Families came to see their children's artwork displayed on the walls. Local newspaper reporters came to write stories about Grace's amazing journey. Even some doctors and therapists came because they had heard about Grace's success with prosthetic hands. All the paintings were hung on the walls with small cards explaining who had created each one. Grace's paintings were displayed alongside the colorful, creative works made by children of all ages. Some paintings were made with brushes, others with sponges or fingers, and some used techniques that Grace had invented to help children with different abilities. Grace stood in front of her largest painting, feeling nervous but proud. She wore a pretty blue dress that Emma had helped her choose, and her prosthetic hands were clean and polished. Many people wanted to talk to her and ask questions about her story. When it was time for speeches, Grace walked to the front of the room. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt ready to share her message with everyone who had come to support her and the children this past year. I learned that losing something does not mean losing everything. Grace spoke to the crowd in a clear, strong voice. When I lost my hands in the fire, I thought my life was over. I thought I could never be an artist or a teacher again. But I was wrong. Grace paused and looked round the room at all the faces watching her. She saw parents smiling proudly at their children's artwork. She saw children who had learned to paint in new ways because of their own challenges. She saw Emma standing nearby with tears of joy in her eyes. Sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest gifts. Grace continued. The fire took away my hands, but it could not take away my love for art or my desire to help children learn and create. My prosthetic hands are different from my old hands, but they have allowed me to discover new ways to paint and teach. When Grace finished her speech, Emma stepped forward and hugged her dear friend tightly. And I learned that helping others helps heal our own hearts. Emma said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Grace taught me that even when we feel broken, we can still help each other become whole again. From somewhere in the audience, a small voice called out. It was Tom, the little boy who had learned to paint with sponges and his fingers. He raised his hand high in the air and asked, "Miss Grace, will you keep teaching us forever?" Grace smiled the biggest smile anyone had ever seen on her face. She held up both of her prosthetic hands with pride and answered, "Forever and always. Tom, as long as there are children who want to learn, I will be here to teach them." The art show was a huge success. People bought many of the paintings, and the money raised was used to expand the art programs at the ranch. Emma and Grace were able to build a bigger studio and buy more supplies soon. Children from towns all over the region started coming to learn that disabilities do not define them. Their dreams do not as the evening ended and people began to go home. Emma and Grace walked slowly back to the ranch under the bright stars. The night was clear and beautiful, and they could see their breath in the cold air. Grace carried her old cloth bag. But now it was filled with thank you letters from grateful families instead of fear and unused. "Prosthetic hands, Grace," Emma said as they walked. "Do you ever regret that stormy night when you collapsed at my gate? Do you ever wish you had kept walking and never stopped here?" Grace thought about this question for a moment. She remembered how desperate and hopeless she had felt that night, stumbling through the snow with nowhere to go. Emma smiled warmly and took Grace's prosthetic hand in her own real hand. "That storm brought me the greatest gift. It brought me you, and it showed both of us that we are stronger than we ever imagined." Hand in hand, they walked toward their home, knowing that tomorrow would bring new students, new paintings, and new reasons to believe in the power of human kindness and friendship.